The moment that you guys have been waiting for is finally here. A couple weeks ago, I started an Etsy seller independent survey, and we ended up getting a lot of people who responded. I talked to Anthony Wolf, our CEO over at eRank, and I asked him, how many people do we need for this to be statistically significant? He said it needs to be at least 1,000 for it to hold any statistical significance. Well, we had almost 4,000 people. I think it was 3,600 something.
Is it 36 or 3,800? One of those two.
Something.
A lot.
Yeah, it was a decent amount of sellers who responded, people within my community, and then it also got shared into other communities. So thank you to everybody who took the survey. Obviously, we tried our best to ask a range of different questions. Yeah. Pam Duthie over at eRank helped me to think of some questions. Anthony Wolf submitted a couple questions. I added some questions that I was personally curious about, but I was trying to get a good scope for how sellers are feeling about Etsy right now. We'll get a little bit more into the details here in just a few minutes. The main things, though, that I really want to stress today as we get into this presentation, because there's been a lot of speculation that now like Starla's anti-Etsy. That's not the case.
Not even close. Not
the case at all. When here on my channel, when we're talking about things like alternate marketplaces, these are just because they tend to line up with, us calling Etsy out for various poor practices and things that the seller community are concerned about. We have always talked about making sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket and that you are diversifying the platforms that you sell on in the event that something were to happen to Etsy, or if you decide that you want to move elsewhere. Or, worst case scenario, if your shop got shut down for some reason. We want to make sure that we are being intelligent, because Etsy certainly is not my only income stream. I have various income streams, and I also just started a Shopify last night, so I can learn a little bit more about that. So really, this isn't meant to scare you. It's more to gain awareness for the overall state of Etsy, which was the title of the survey, the state of Etsy, so that we can understand how sellers are feeling about the platform. We can go ahead and share our screen.
Let's go ahead and screen share.
So again, this was an independent survey. This survey, Etsy was not involved at all. I know a couple people were actually afraid to take the survey because they were afraid that Etsy might do something to their shop if they did.
Etsy wasn't involved in this at all. I mean, they might watch after the fact, but nobody's individual data is going to be shared here.
No, we didn't collect any data. It was, I don't even have email addresses or anything. So nothing you guys said was stored unless you said something specifically about your shop name. But even then, with almost 4,000 respondents, there's no way that Mark and I could have gone through each of the individual responses.
No way.
So, I guess I got to click into this, don't I?
Yes.
Okay, so why we conducted the survey in the first place, I think that is pretty darn important. I know a lot of people were curious about what our overall goals and objectives were, especially since Etsy themselves conducts similar surveys. But the thing is, though Etsy does conduct these surveys internally, we never actually get to see the outcomes. So while, Etsy has been sending out a lot of different surveys to sellers, I've actually, just since we sent our survey, we had a ton of people email us and say, hey, the timing is weird because Etsy just sent me a survey with similar questions to your survey.
Yeah, they send out surveys a few times a year.
Yeah, and I didn't base any of my survey questions on anything that they've sent. Nope. If you've received surveys from Etsy and the questions were similar to our survey, that is just pure coincidence. I have not personally been surveyed by Etsy in probably about a year, I think was the last time I got a survey. So it is good that they're asking sellers, for their opinions on certain aspects of Etsy, but we won't ever get to see the bulk of that. And what I want to know is, I want to measure the overall morale of those sellers who are most invested in the Etsy community, which are people like you who sit and watch videos about bettering your business. They're sellers who are trying to keep up with Etsy news. They're not the sellers who just load a bunch of products onto Etsy and don't care about how Etsy itself is doing.
Yeah, we're not quick fix YouTubers. You guys are all people who actually want to improve their shops in a good way, for the most part.
Right. There's no get rich quick when it comes to Etsy. So I consider my community to be sellers who are invested in this community who are going to give us really great responses and really great answers that are going to represent the best of Etsy. I wanted to identify the top pain points of sellers. I'm not saying that I'm going to be able to help with all of these pain points, but it's good to identify what needs to change with Etsy so we can all collectively become more vocal, which we've done in the past through our Keep Etsy Human movement.
It's about awareness, which inevitably will lead to Etsy hearing something. It's exactly like our Keep Etsy Human platform a couple years ago.
Exactly, which Etsy did make some positive changes like the week after that. I want to project the future direction of Etsy in order to assist in building seller adaptability and readiness. So basically, you guys are constantly feeling uncertain about what Etsy's doing. And obviously, Mark and I, we don't have all the answers, but based on the data, we can kind of try to forecast and project our feelings. Just having been on Etsy for over 12 years. We're actually going into year 13 now.
Ooh.
I know, right?
It's been a while.
So because of that, and because we have so much data, and over at eRank, we have millions of sellers that we work with and cater to. It's good for us to all know how we think that Etsy is going to, kind of combat some of the major issues that they've been experiencing over the years. And obviously, we want to continue our ongoing seller advocacy. This allows us to provide a transparent report of what you guys are feeling, common sentiments, and the overall emotions. Because I tell you what, there's nothing more frustrating than feeling like you are completely alone in the way that you're feeling when, Etsy makes bad choices or choices that, you may not agree with. But we also want to see how others are feeling as well. So collectively, we can see where things are really weakest when it comes to Etsy. And I think that some of the results today are going to surprise you. And obviously, the last point is to hopefully, no promises, but we've done it once, maybe we'll do it again, to hopefully gather the attention and awareness of Etsy. Unfortunately, their head of customer support, who I had previously communicated with back last year, he no longer works at Etsy, which I didn't find out until I tried to get a hold of him again and was given some canned responses, copy and paste from someone who wasn't him. I had to go look at his LinkedIn profile to see that he no longer worked there. But it's kind of like I got to start over again, trying to get Etsy to pay attention after gaining that valuable contact. The best way to do this is to make Etsy aware, help Etsy become aware. Our efforts through our Keep Etsy Human movement did get their attention. So continue being vocal and continue telling Etsy when they do things right. We don't just want to be negative Nancys.
Not everything they do is bad.
Exactly. This is not intended to be a slam piece. These are words from you guys. And I think that it's important that we both explain to Etsy the things that are good about the platform, as well as the things that Etsy sellers really need to see change in order for Etsy to get back to where it was a few years ago when we actually had some seller trust. So that's why we did the survey. We didn't do this survey for Etsy. We did it for you guys, so you can see these things. However, if we can get Etsy's attention, all the better. Share this video. Show it to friends. All right. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. This one actually surprised me. And
yeah, me too.
So which Etsy category best represents your shop? We see it all the time. Sellers say, POD is taking over Etsy. AI art is taking over Etsy, yada, yada. And I really wanted to know, of all of those who are at least here in my community, which best represents your shop? Handmade, POD, digital, or supplies? And, full transparency, I sold Handmade for 10 years, but I am strictly POD now. And I have another POD business that I'm building on Shopify right now. So nothing against POD. But I just wanted to get an idea of how many sellers represent each of these categories. I was astounded that a majority of sellers who took our survey were Handmade. Now, this makes this survey very valuable. And it's not that POD doesn't have a place on Etsy. I do believe that it does. We have plenty of artists who hand paint work, and they can't just hand paint 1 million copies of their beautiful work. They have to rely on POD in order to distribute their work. So POD absolutely has a place. However, the fact that a lot of the sellers and most of the sellers who took our survey are Handmade, to me, this says that there are a lot of people with very, very valuable voices. Again, that's not saying that POD isn't valuable, But if you're spending hours and hours and hours creating products by hand, putting your blood, sweat, and tears into these products, that tells me that you are very invested in the platform and you're willing to give us some fantastic responses.
I did want to note here that it does show higher. That I know there's some math people out here that are showing, this shows more than 100%. It does. You can sell in more than one category. That is why.
Right. Well, and we have a lot of sellers in our category who they crochet, but maybe they have like
right.
a t-shirt that says like, I love crochet.
Or people that do handmade print on demand and digital. They'll sell some of their designs that maybe they didn't qualify for a shirt or whatever it is. Anyway.
Right. But that overwhelming majority there was handmade.
I was genuinely surprised by that. I thought it would be closer to 50-50.
I did too. All right. Next up, how many sales have you made on Etsy? This was just good to know information. Don't know how important it's going to be to you guys, but I wanted to give you everything that we had. So I found this pretty interesting. It looks like a decent mix of experienced sellers and sellers who, only have a couple sales. Mr. Moore, did you have anything that you wanted to point out on this one? Because I know that this correlates with other.
Yeah, we'll have more points as we go a little bit further. But I mean, really looking at it, if you look at the bottom half portion of the chart here, the dark blue, the red, and the orange, we show that almost 50%. I don't remember the exact number. Almost 50% of sellers have less than 500 sales, which does correlate pretty well with the later slides about how long people have been selling on Etsy.
Right.
So there's more to talk about later. I don't have any points to push off right now just because, you can see the data here.
But compare it, think of it like this. We have sellers with under 500 sales right here. And the top of the pie, we have those sellers that are over 500
you
sales.
could even say less than 1,000 sales here. And you can even see that almost half have 1,000 sales or more.
Right.
Which is
big chunks.
Right, exactly. So there are people doing relatively well on Etsy.
Yes. All right. So how would you describe your Etsy shop's financial contribution to your income? So is it paying the bills? Is it providing, a decent amount of money, or are you finding yourself in the red? So go ahead. This one was a little concerning, but Mark will go into that in a little bit. A majority of the pie is spending more money on their shop than what they feel that they're making back in sales, with the runner-up here being that it is a side income.
But again, maybe we should have done the how long have you been on Etsy first, because that's probably the most significant when it comes to all these. But sole source of income being the smallest portion, that's not really surprising. Very few sellers make it to a point where they're doing full-time income. That's just like any business. The majority of businesses do not go to a point where it's like the only thing that you can do, right? However, while that's the case, quite a few people are doing, let's see here, hobby, 14.5%, side income, 23%, part-time business, 14%, full-time business, 14%. I'm spending more on my shop. That's only 27%. So these, you really, when we're looking at it, only 27% of people are saying, yeah, I'm not getting anything out of this. The rest of these people are getting at least something out of it. They're breaking even. So it's not, I didn't want this data to turn out to be a slam piece, because especially the later data, looks a lot more depressing. But when you really break things down to how it looks, people are making at least something. And just like we were talking earlier, you can't have all of your eggs in one basket. You can't have an expectation that this is going to be your sole source of income. And for a lot of people, while it's not their sole source of income, it is a source of income. It is additional. It's an extra Christmas present. It's an extra birthday present. It's an extra going out to eat on vacation. It's a massage. It's whatever they need in their day-to-day life. It's something.
Right.
So we can see that people are making money on Etsy. And when we say, I think this, it's a great time, especially now, to start on Etsy, to continue pushing into your own business. And Etsy is a great place to start, because the startup cost compared to like your own website or Shopify, where the margins aren't super great, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, Shopify, I'm quickly realizing that in terms of like what you pay per month and everything that you need. And then if you want a theme, I'm going through, learning Shopify, and it's starting to add up pretty quick. I just bought, I've got the domain. I just signed up for the subscription. It's $39.99 a month.
Yep.
It's starting to stack up very, very quickly.
But we'll get on that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot later.
All right. So how long have you been selling on Etsy? Again, this is just kind of more internal data that helps us to paint a broader picture.
Right.
Most Etsy sellers it's
less than 2 years.
Yeah, it's a pretty,
not most.
It's a pretty even mix of sellers who have been selling for a long time versus not long at all.
Yeah, this is, you got the dark blue here. That's less than a year, 2 years, and then everybody else is more than 3 years. But I mean, realistically, when we look at this, and again, we should have done a side by side, but when you look at how many people have been on Etsy for less than 2 years, and then you start looking at how many people are just in the hobby and I'm spending more money, it makes sense that this many people are spending more money than they're making when you look at how many people have been on the platform for less than 2 years. Obviously, when you first start a business, you're going to be making less than what you're bringing in because you're not making the sales yet.
Right.
It makes total sense. And of course, there are people who are probably in this 5+ year category or 4+ year category that are not making ends meet for the business specifically. But I would wager, and again, maybe we can do follow-up surveys at some point. I would wager to bet that the majority of the people who are making less than what their business is bringing or spending are probably in this category here.
Yeah.
They're new sellers who haven't been on the platform for very long.
All right. So this is like the big overarching question, and then everything else stems from this question.
Yeah, these are where they get a little more depressing.
How would you rate Etsy overall as a selling platform in 2025? And honestly, I thought it was going to be worse than it was.
Yeah. I did too.
I thought that everybody was going to be like, I hate Etsy, which, that's not. Etsy is a great platform, in my opinion. There's just some major problems internally that need to be fixed.
Of course.
All right, go ahead. Okay. So majority, right in the middle, but those 4 stars, not too shabby. Not a lot of people rating it 5 stars, but the 3 and 4 stars are taking up a majority.
Yep. It's not, you see 3 stars, but again, quite a large portion, almost the same as the 3 stars voted 4 stars. It's they're really not doing all that bad. Right
in the middle. So, and you know what? I think I agree. I would probably put myself at 3.
3.5. Yeah, 3.5.
I love what Etsy is, and I love what it used to represent. I just feel that everything that we're about to talk about in the survey needs to be addressed.
Yep, I do too. And I think before we go into those, because most of it is on customer support and reactions I think 3.5 stars for Etsy is fair in that we're talking about a platform with over 5 million sellers, with how many friggin' buyers? So many buyers.
9 million, something like that.
It's a lot of buyers.
It'll come up again in the data.
It comes up. And them having the customer support ratings and things here coming forward aren't really surprising when you consider how many millions of people they have to deal with on a daily basis. We have to keep that in mind. We also have to keep in mind bad actors, both on the buyer side and the seller side, not to mention everything else they have to put up with as a business. And we know the stuff with the shareholders, people are upset about that. But realistically, with all things said, I think 3 to 4 stars is fair for how Etsy is doing overall with the factors in play.
Yeah. Customer support's a whole other thing.
So these include some assessments. Most sellers find Etsy adequate, but not exceptional.
Yeah. It gets the job done. However, it's nothing to write home about right now until they start making some major changes.
And like I said, I think Etsy's a good platform to start off with, especially considering the initial upfront cost and the support. Especially for those of you who are not internet literate and absolutely putting together a website is not something you could ever do.
Not support as in a person helping you, but the guided process of starting a shop. Etsy tells you exactly what you need to do. Now, obviously, sometimes snags happen during that sign-up process. And
again, that's a website with 5-point-something million sellers. Snags are going to happen. It's not perfect.
But for the most part, when you start a new shop, Etsy tells you exactly what you first do this, then do this, then do this. So
And with a wealth of information available out there and the ease of use, Etsy is an easy to use platform. It's an exceptionally easy to use platform.
Okay, I believe that this was an Anthony Wolf question, I think. I might be wrong.
How satisfied are you with Etsy's fee structure in 2025? This one wasn't really surprising to me either.
Now, a couple people did say, when did I miss a fee increase? Etsy has not increased their fee since 2022, I believe it is. So this is just, if you're brand new to Etsy, you don't get scared. It's not a new fee. This is just overall Etsy fees.
Not including the $15 upfront fee to start an account, which was February 2024.
Yes, that was just last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
this one wasn't really all that surprising to me. I think this is a fair assessment.
Yeah, 4s and 2s are a neck and neck. Most people, again, right in the middle, rating it a 3. I think that 3s are what you're going to see a lot when people don't know how to feel about something.
I think 3 is fair because we don't see what's happening with those fees. They're not transparent. Like, obviously there's a lot going on in the back end at Etsy. They're fighting hackers, and I'm sure with AI that's an extraordinary feat right now.
Penetration testing.
Penetration testing against an AI, I'm sure is unimaginably difficult. Customer support and everything else that they're dumping money into, because guess what? Every time their platform grows by a couple million people, they can only afford to hire a couple hundred more customer support people, and it doesn't anywhere near make up for the amount of need that increases with the platform, right? So,
well, not to mention in 2022, right before the holiday season, they laid off 250 people?
Yeah, so. A buttload. I don't know. So I think with a little more transparency, this might go up from 2.7 to maybe 3.2, 3.3 stars. I think people would be more satisfied if they said, here's our fees, here's what we did with them this year. I don't know how legally they're able to do that. I don't know the science and the laws and things behind that. So, but I think a little bit of transparency would increase these numbers, because I think people overall understand that fees are important. If Etsy charged no fees, they couldn't exist. They couldn't have programmers. They couldn't have security specialists, customer support specialists, copyright people, and lawyers. And there's a lot that goes into running a business of this scale.
All right. I think this was another Anthony Wolf question. Do you feel Etsy's fees, transactions, listing, payment processing, ads, etc., are fair for the value provided? And this was really telling.
Yeah.
So, it is a mixed bag. This is probably, of all of our survey questions, this is the closest.
Yes.
Obviously, a majority are saying that they're not fair, but I mean, it looks like there's a lot of sellers who are like, you know what? I've tried other platforms. It seems pretty fair. Yep. For me, I think it's pretty fair. I think that the Etsy fees are fair.
I think they're pretty fair. I think the upfront fee is fine. A controversial statement here. For people who are above a certain threshold, I wouldn't be entirely opposed to a monthly fee. Especially if you were to include things like additional support, live chat support. Obviously, they need to scale before they could do something like that. But I think the 28% here is still, I think that's validation for my point that a lot of people are unsure because there's no transparency.
Right.
If we had more transparency, I think a lot of that not sure would probably be on the side of, yes, that's fair. I'm sure a few more people would still run to the no, they're not fair. But I think it would be a lot closer to straight 50-50 if there was a 100% or, as transparent as they could be. But they're not. They're not transparent about what goes where.
Exactly. All right. How has Etsy's fee structure impacted your pricing strategy? One thing that we hear sellers say is that they cannot compete with people who keep decreasing their prices. Everybody says, everybody's pricing at the bottom of the barrel. And I can't compete anymore. So I wanted to see how many people have dropped their prices, how many people have left their prices the same, and how many people have actually raised their prices out of our survey.
Yes, because especially I think forums play a lot into that. I think people read in a lot of places like, oh, everybody's dropping their prices to nothing. But I don't think the problem is as big as what people think it is.
And we were pretty pretty close there. Most people have raised their prices, which is important because you do have to absorb fees.
You do, yes.
And shipping and things like that. Or if you want to run a sale, if you want to participate in any of Etsy's little sales and campaigns, not very many people have lowered their prices.
Nope. The market speaks. And what you can really take away from this as well is, a lot of people, I'm afraid to raise my prices. I'm afraid to raise my prices. Why? Almost 70% of people have said that they've raised their prices in order to accommodate the fee structure, which means 66% of your competitors are raising their prices to meet the fee structure, which means the majority of people are raising their prices. Obviously, sometimes you can't raise your prices. We know that. Sometimes you're already in the top 10%. You might even be riding the top 1% of your price range and you just cannot increase your prices anymore. We get it. But you really should evaluate the types of products that you're selling. Look at the market and see if you have room to raise your prices a little bit, because your competitors are doing the same. It's not going to hurt you if everyone is doing it. And it's not going to benefit you by keeping your prices insanely low when everybody is increasing your prices, because again, people are just going to assume that there's something wrong with your product or that it's secondhand or whatever. It doesn't.
Perceived value
exactly
decreases. All right. So this was one of our assessments. Many sellers have adjusted their pricing to cope with rising fees. A common response was, I've raised my prices to offset Etsy's cuts. Some likely absorb the costs or reduce expenses, but the prevailing sentiment is that fees pressure sellers to charge customers more.
Which makes sense, 100%.
And Etsy tells us when things change, when postage change, or when they want us to, when they wanted us to charge $6 or less for shipping, they specifically tell us to absorb the rest. It's not supposed to just come out of our pockets. We absorb those costs. Do you feel that Etsy's fee increases have been justified by improvements to the platform? So this is where Mark was talking more about that transparency. If Etsy was more transparent, maybe sellers would have a better understanding, because as I'm sure that you've probably guessed, most sellers they have not felt the impact or the positive outcomes of paying more money.
And unsure being in there too. I mean, yes was only 4%.
Exactly.
That's insane. And now I think a little bit of education would change these numbers a little bit, because obviously a good majority of the money that goes into a business like Etsy is not spent on just directly improving the buyer or the seller experience. Again, it's improving code to make the website faster. It's implementing new technologies to respond to threats for new technologies. AI is rapidly growing. We're 2 years out from the Will Smith video, and now you can create a realistic video of Will Smith doing whatever you want. Like it's a rapidly evolving world. And I think if people understood what really goes into running a website of this scale, you would understand that like a majority of the work that their programmers and the quality people are doing in the back has nothing to do with the buyers or the sellers. It's all about the website itself.
Right.
But I still think that the number would be more than 50% for no. And to be completely honest with you, I would have to agree. I would have to completely agree without a transparency report, without knowing exactly what this money is going into, like verbatim, one for one. Obviously, they can't tell us everything, but if I knew one for one what it was, and you could tell me what it was, maybe I'd change my mind. But I agree with this.
Do you want to take a crack at how much they spent on their Super Bowl ad?
It was like 10 million, right?
It was $7 or $8 million.
Yeah, it's not surprising. It was a gigantic waste of money, and it was a terrible ad.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Etsy.
Completely
it
agree.
was a terrible ad. I don't think it did anything for the. I mean, I could be wrong. I'd love to see the numbers to see that it actually benefited something, but I don't think they were advertising to their target market to begin with, and the ad itself was already bad. So,
well, not to mention, we can look at the quarterly reports and see that it didn't help. The quarterly reports literally show that it had. I mean, Etsy was still on the decline.
And when you look into how much money that is, how many customer support people could you pay for how long for $8 million?
Exactly. All right, so in 2022, Etsy raised its base transaction fee from 5% to 6.5%, a whopping 30% increase. 70% of sellers feel like the hike wasn't justified by improvements to the platform, while only 4% believe the higher fees were worth better services. Etsy's leadership claimed the fee increase would fund marketing and tools for sellers, which obviously marketing did take place. We know marketing it didn't take place in 2022. It took place in 2023, their Super Bowl ad, and they did put a lot of money into marketing.
Sure, there's marketing other places as well. They have TV commercials and radio ads and a lot of stuff that we don't see that they don't talk about.
But most sellers aren't at least feeling like they're seeing those benefits based on our survey.
No, the marketing efforts, I don't think, are improving enough to keep up with the increased seller count and the decreased buyer demand.
Right.
I don't think it's doing enough.
Whereas good old-fashioned customer support, I feel like if they were to sacrifice some of these stupid ads that they're pushing, I feel like that increase in customer support will both help boost seller morale. And
again, how much money is $7 or $8 million?
Right.
And how many people could you hire to do that? I mean, even high-level developers, you could probably hire another 10 or 15 people for 5 to 10 years for that much money. Anyway.
All right. High fees are a huge concern for sellers. This was noted multiple times during our survey.
Yes.
Many feel Etsy is squeezing them with rising costs without delivering enough value in return. Having to raise prices just to maintain profit margins leaves sellers worried about scaring away price-sensitive buyers, which is something that we all hear in the Etsy community. When asked what they'd change about Etsy, one of the most common requests was lower the fees or at least provide better value to justify them. I don't think that we need lower fees. I'll be honest. I think that the fees are fine. But
compared to other platforms, I think they're completely fair.
But when we look at Etsy over the last... How many quarterly reports have gone by? How many investors' reports have gone by where GMS is down? That's the money that we, the sellers, are making, but Etsy profits are up. That means Etsy's making money, but sellers aren't, which means Etsy is making money from these fees. If Etsy GMS is going up, but if Etsy's money is going up, but GMS is going down, that means that Etsy is making money from us. Right. And that is a problem. And their investors are starting to call them out on it after what? We're going on 2 years now of just declining GMS, but Etsy themselves are profiting.
Which is super duper rich because obviously the reason that that's happening is because they're catering to the shareholders and not the sellers or the buyers. Because if they were catering to the buyers, they would be making more sales. If they were catering to the sellers, they would be giving them more tools to make more sales.
Right.
Optimizing the algorithm or completely changing it or implementing AI so they can put products in front of people that actually want to see those products. Most of the things that I see as a man when I get on my Etsy seller dashboard are either past things I've already looked at or absolutely nothing that I would ever buy in a million years that's completely unrelated to anything I would ever purchase.
Yeah, Etsy on mobile has eliminated, I don't know if you've noticed this over the last few weeks, but they've eliminated all those like related to things you've previously searched. And now it just gives you a Pinterest style feed of trendy items that have nothing to do with anything personalized to you.
And you know what? That they're testing out something new. Maybe that works. Maybe they're trying to follow a social media shopping style of platform, which makes sense because we know it is an extremely effective form of selling. However, is it an effective form of selling for a platform that is not a social media platform?
Right.
We don't know. We won't know until obviously they finish testing and we get Q2, Q3 results when they finish out, because they're testing this crap during like non-peak season before we get into the fall rush.
We haven't even gotten Q1 results for 2025. So
well, yeah, we're not through it yet.
Yeah. All right. So how would you rate Etsy's customer support as a whole in 2025? This one, again, not very surprising.
Yeah, this one didn't surprise me at all.
Nobody's given Etsy more than a 3-star here.
No.
The overwhelming majority are giving them a 3-star rating, with the follow-up being a 1-star rating and then a 2-star rating.
And it's really unfortunate because this is a compounding issue, and you see this a lot with other businesses that do customer service as well. And I know anybody that's worked in customer service knows that like 7 out of 10 customers treat you good, 1 is indifferent, one is a little mean and one is a total jackbutt to you the entire time that you're on your phone. And every time you deal with one of those people, your mood for the day decreases and your care goes down.
Right.
So as you see this many people thinking that customer support is bad, unfortunately, a lot of people's sentiment is like this. And that results in customer service getting treated bad, which usually results in them having worse customer service. It's a compounding problem. However, Etsy's customer service is pathetically bad.
What I don't understand is how we live in a world with AI, and you could give every customer service rep an AI database where they could, even if you could paste in a question and AI could literally give them all the answers that Etsy could ever provide from Etsy's, best practices, their ultimate guide to search, whatever it may be.
Right. And here, narrow it down. Here's the most likely answer to your problem.
But Pam Duthie and I have both gotten in long conversations and chats with Etsy support, and they have fed us completely wrong information, and we have had to educate them. And that is unacceptable in 2025.
What did I reach out to them for?
Oh,
like
I can't
2
remember.
years ago, and they just gave me a swipe file after my first line was explicitly, please do not give me a swipe file for this response.
Right.
This requires a human. And I had to respond and say, no, we are influencers in this space. Please reread my email. And they gave me a big, long, real email after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty bad at that.
So obviously customer support is one of Etsy's biggest pain points. Sellers rated Etsy support quality at a miserable 2.36 out of 5 on average. Again, not surprising at all. Over half, which was 52%, gave it a 1 or a 2, mostly due to unhelpful or slow service. Only about 14% felt support was good, rating it a 4 or 5. And then in our open response section, words like worthless and inadequate were extremely common.
Yes.
So that was one of the most, in terms of like the feedback in the open response section.
It was bad.
Most people said something about the customer support being awful.
Yeah. And now again, before we cut back into this one, I do also want to stress the point again. Etsy, as of December 31st, had 2,400 employees. I don't know if customer service is included in that, how many customer service people work for them, how many customer service people are outsourced to a different company that aren't counted in that number count. But again, remember, 5-point-something million sellers, and just as double that in buyers. A grain of salt and a grain of respect for probably less than 1,000 people that deal with 100 times more people than what they have to support.
Well, compare that though. Listen, compare that to eRank. We have, I believe, 2 million users, 2 million users at eRank, and we have like 5 customer support girls.
Right. But there's so much more that can go wrong.
I guess there's buyers too.
Imagine you're at a concert and there are 5,000 people at this concert. Scale wise, you are the one security guard at this concert.
Right. Okay.
And there are 8 fights that break out at once. And now, you know what I mean? Like, you have to understand the sense of scale when it comes to customer support for a site like this. Now, I'm on the side of using AI. I even like the initial bit of customer support, I think, should be 100% AI, because
to get you where you need to be.
Right. 90% of problems can be solved without a human needing to be in, or like, because how many emails do you think they get in customer support that are like, how do I fix this problem? How do I fix this one problem? And it's literally one click away within the menu. People that are either
brand new,
tech illiterate,
right,
or maybe don't read well. Like, there are so many problems that are solved with just simple one-click solutions that don't need human intervention, that unfortunately get piled into the same inbox for human intervention. And I'm sure they do have some level of AI that sorts stuff and whatever. If they don't, they're stupid at this point. But again, give them a little bit of benefit, because it's a lot of people working with not enough.
I don't know. Amazon gives you better customers.
Amazon's $1 trillion company.
That's true. That's true. All right, so how easy is it to get help from Etsy's customer support when needed?
I agree with this one, though, 100%. It's bad.
I don't think I have ever had Etsy actually help me.
Nope.
I have never actually messaged Etsy support and gotten an answer that that solved my problem.
Only when I threatened them as an influencer to publicly oust them for how pathetically bad their response was to an emergency question that needed answered as soon as possible.
Yeah.
That was the only time. And again, AI could 100% fix this problem by getting rid of 90% of the terrible questions that don't need answered by
just a filter, you know, just a little layer, a little filter that passes through the serious stuff, like people not getting paid or bank issues.
And I assume that they are using AI, which is why they're probably getting such a bad, because people are getting automatic responses back. They need to lighten that filter up a little bit and not put so many serious questions within those filters, getting pushed stupid answers to actually important questions.
Yeah.
Like, I changed my name and my account got shut off, or I need to change my bank account info and you shut my account off. And all of these like actually urgent questions need to not be handled by a bot.
Right. Or even take seller like experience into account. Like if this seller is somebody who's making several $1,000s a month, maybe prioritize their question, because if their account is deactivated during that time frame and they're a seller who is someone who is following all the rules, then they're losing their income at that point. Just like Amber Marie, her shop got shut down for a stupid reason because of what? It was her last name, like something about when she got married, it didn't match up.
Yeah. And again, this sounds like a lot of simple solutions to simple problems, but these are not simple problems at the scale that Etsy is. And I almost certainly can say that these are not simple solutions that need done. We're broad, giving solutions here, but I'm sure that the solutions are significantly more complicated than what any of us can truly perceive without actually, again, seeing a transparent breakdown of everything. And they can only do so much before it starts getting iffy. But give them a little bit of credit for the scale that they are at.
Yeah. All right, so when sellers were asked how easy is it to get help when needed, the response was overwhelmingly negative. Again, not surprised. Over 56% said it's hard to get support, rating it at a 1 or a 2. Only about 15% found it easy. The biggest complaint was struggling to reach a real person, which you can't get support if you can't even reach a real person, which is very hard, and getting timely, useful resolutions. The few times that I have been able to reach a person, I have not gotten timely responses.
No.
I do not get useful resolutions almost ever. And tons of you guys during the last eRank Q&A said that support, your support, like your chats, they just closed the window. Like they were typing.
I've had that happen to
They're
me
like
before,
typing their responses and the people are just closing the window.
Like, nope, not today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had a shop issue like an account suspension, payment hold, or dispute that required Etsy support in the last year? So these are big problems, right?
Yes.
These are major ones.
Before you go on to the next tab, this is the one that I think a lot of people talk about Etsy not being a good platform to sell on because you're just going to get your account shut down. You're just going to have this. You're just going to have that. This one was actually a little surprising to me.
But in a good way.
As much as we hear it, and I always say, the angriest crowd is the loudest crowd. Problems are usually perceived bigger than what they actually are, and the data is very telling of that. Less than half, significantly less than half, only about a third of people said yes. Now, what's important to remember here, I don't know if you guys remember, when did we do our seller support thing where we had people
1 year ago, last
1 year
April.
ago. If you remember, I don't remember how many people, what percentage we said.
300 people.
What percentage of people we said were people who actually were doing something wrong that resulted in their shops getting shut down?
30%.
But it was about a third. That's significant. And if you take something like this, and obviously we can't tell how many of those people were in things like this. However, that's very telling when you look at something like this, because now we're seeing that only about a third of people did have one of these issues where there's account suspension, payment hold, dispute, etc. And if we factor in roughly, we'll say even a little bit less than a third of those people
who were breaking rules,
are within this 31% who had this issue. That shows us that while this is not statistically insignificant, this is huge. This is still a huge deal, but there's very likely that a large portion of these people were also doing something wrong. So
not always.
Not always.
Amber Marie, we love her to death.
Yeah.
And she experienced it.
Oh, no. I'm not trying to discredit that at all.
Right.
100% people are getting shut down for things that they didn't do. But that shows us that the problem isn't as big. It's not, you are not guaranteed to get your shop shut down if you start an Etsy shop. This is one of those things that plays into, do I think it's a good platform to start on in the year 2025? Absolutely, 100%. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, you've got a 70% chance to not get shut down, even if you did something wrong, right? So it's not as big of a problem as what they say. However, 31% is still, Etsy, if you're listening, this is an alarming number. This is a lot of people
with big problems,
not little problems. And again, if we compare this to how many people are actually like doing their sole income, this isn't tearing households apart, right? Like this is like, obviously there's a couple people in here who are probably getting hurt. People like Amber Marie, a lot of their household money comes from this. However, with all of the numbers kind of put in, it's not as significant of a problem as people are making it out to be. But it is still a problem. I really don't want to make it seem like I'm downplaying this, because this is something at Etsy. This is the primary thing that you have to address.
Yeah.
100%. All the other stuff, the customer support could definitely help. The customer support could change this number from 31% to less than 10%. Like,
even if we could get it down to 20%, that would be huge.
Adjusting for errors and adjusting for people who are in fact doing things wrong, and either whether intentionally or unintentionally, fixing the customer service could change this graph to being less than 10%, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right,
that made sense.
So this was an optional question. If they have reached out to customer support for one of these big issues, how would you rate your experience with Etsy support? So these are people rating their experiences who had really big problems. This was only 1,541 people. Mm-hmm. So these were, a fraction of those who were originally sent the survey.
Which makes sense. Some people might not want to answer the question, or not all of them reached out to customer support. So that makes sense.
But those who did not have a great experience, clearly.
Yeah.
So this to me is the biggest problem, because these are big issues that sellers are having, and they are not feeling like they are getting the help that they need.
Yeah, Etsy 1 star here should alarm you.
Yeah.
100%
Absolutely.
This should alarm you.
And I mean, it's only 613 people in the grand scheme of things, but still, this is a lot of people. So about 1 in 4 sellers experienced a major shop issue in the past year. That is significant. Like account suspensions,
way too much,
payment holds, or disputes that required reaching out to Etsy support. Frustration is obviously very high. Even well-established shops in good standing report sudden payment reserves, which should not be happening.
No.
Or automated suspensions that are nearly impossible to appeal. Tons of sellers who make handmade items, who get their images like stolen from Temu, who are being accused of not making their items. It happens all the time. The lack of empathy and poor outcome leave many sellers feeling unheard. That is one of the most common things that we hear from those who are experiencing these problems. Their money gets cut off, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And for Amber, it took her, I think, over a week to get her shop back. And Amber makes a
lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money for Etsy.
I can't even guess how much money Amber makes on Etsy right now.
Significant enough. And when it comes to the payment reserves and things like that, it needs to be streamlined. Customer support wise, there should be when a customer is put on an account reserve or an account suspension, there should be a flag that's attached to their account that allows them to reach someone faster than an average regular customer support problem.
Right.
You're talking about a livelihood. And when you're talking about, again, somebody like Amber Marie, who might rely on that for their livelihood, waiting a week for that might be the difference between...
That's thousands of dollars in sales.
Right. Like maybe they were planning on doing their payment out and paying their house payment, and now they have to get out of their house because you held their money for a week.
Right.
That's alarming, and it's not okay. I don't like the payment reserve system. I understand why it's there. I don't fully agree with it. I think it needs a big revamp.
But they shouldn't throw it at sellers who have been selling for a while.
No, they absolutely shouldn't. And if they do, they need to provide a reason. That's been my thing from the get-go. They're afraid to provide reasons because they know that if they provide a reason and they're wrong, that makes them legally liable and people can sue them. That's a cop-out and it's pathetic.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So over 90% of sellers feel Etsy does not take seller concerns seriously. This was a survey that I did not provide the screenshot for because I had accidentally made it where you could write in your own response. So there were a lot of weird responses. Yeah. It was all messed up. But I went ahead and analyzed it, and of that, 90% of sellers did say that they do not feel like their concerns are being taken seriously. So that is scary. As one survey respondent put it, Etsy has become a hostile place for small businesses. The changes have brought many of us to the brink of financial ruin. We had thousands of different, responses in the open response section. I couldn't possibly showcase all of your quotes, but I tried to grab some that would capture, feelings. So, All right. How would you rate the effectiveness of Etsy's search algorithm in 2025? Now, I do want to point out a couple things. There have not been any notable updates to the algorithm. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of sellers are misinterpreting high competition as changes to the algorithm, especially when competition levels went up by the millions within 1 to 2 years. That can feel like you're getting less visibility because of an algorithmic change, when in reality, the economy, there's less spending on Etsy. We already did a whole episode of the Friday Bean several weeks ago showing how Etsy is declining along with all e-commerce. Obviously, that is due to a poor economic climate. People don't have as much money.
And political uncertainty.
Right.
It's going to continue being that for a little while.
And competition has gone up by the millions, and because of that, it can feel like it was an algorithm change because it might be overnight. It might seem like it was overnight, but this is not due to an algorithmic change. But sellers feel that way. They assume that that is the issue. So, how would you rate the effectiveness of Etsy's search algorithm in 2025? 3 stars to me is most sellers feeling like they don't know either way. They don't feel happy, but they don't know enough about it to really be able to say more than that.
I agree with this sentiment, especially looking at my own Etsy.
Yeah.
I'd say 3 stars is about fair.
Yeah, because I don't always see, I get really weird results in my searches. The algorithm isn't perfect.
No, it's not perfect, for sure.
So I say about 3. 1, I feel, is pretty dramatic.
And we don't know if that's the fault of the algorithm or if that's because everybody's trying to trick the algorithm in their own way and it's making the algorithm not work it as intended.
Yeah.
That's also a possibility.
Almost half of sellers, which was 46%, rated Etsy's search effectiveness as below average, with complaints about their products not showing up or getting buried in results. Again, that's not necessarily algorithmic. That can be competition based. Only 17% gave search positive marks. Sellers feel like the algorithm is opaque and unpredictable. That's a direct quote from our respondents. And many longtime sellers have noticed sudden drops in traffic. Again, yes, we're seeing drops in traffic because of a huge influx of new sellers, as well as those coming during a time of poor economic decline. When we're thinking about the economy, that's also driving people to join Etsy to try to make more money because they don't have money to spend. So
or they're scared that they're not going to.
Right. It's a compounding issue, but it's not an algorithmic issue.
Nope.
Frequent complaints include constant algorithm changes, which not happening. That's not happening.
They might be refining, but if anything, that's a good thing.
Right. And the need to constantly tweak SEO just to stay visible. Again,
only if you're a trend chaser.
I hate to say it, but this is kind of just a Crimea River one because
100%.
That's how you play the game. That's what SEO is.
Yep.
SEO, you never set it and forget it. If your issue is that you constantly have to tweak your SEO.
Nothing in business is set it and forget it.
Right.
Ever.
If your issue is that you constantly have to tweak SEO, that's like saying, I'm upset.
Right.
I'm trying to be a baker, but I hate having to constantly buy eggs.
Right. I'm a race car driver. I'm a drag racer, and I don't want to adjust my car. I just want to take it out on the track and drive it without doing anything new.
Right. Like, unfortunately, you do have to tweak your SEO. Right. That is what SEO is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think a lot of these results are just kind of misunderstanding about SEO. And that's why I exist. Like, that is my whole jam. That's all I do.
It's in the term SEO, optimization. You are frequently optimizing your listings. And especially if you're in an industry that like you're trend chasing, when you have to adjust for trendy terms or whatever. I know that's not all of you, but trends change. So it's kind of obvious that that's what you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And if you're feeling called out, just please understand that like I have so many resources here on my channel. I have I've got a whole free SEO program down in the video description. Like this is all I do all day, every day. And I know that it's hard, but it's supposed to be hard. SEO is supposed to be hard because it has to stay competitive. Otherwise, people, your competitors would just get super duper good at it, and you would never rank in search. If it doesn't stay competitive, nobody is able to compete.
Not to mention, you shouldn't be constantly adjusting your SEO anyway. You need to let it cook.
Yeah.
Like 2 months,
60
3
to
months.
90 days.
Yeah, 60 to 90 days. Let it cook for a couple of months before you just go and tweak everything.
Yeah.
And don't ever tweak anything that's selling.
Exactly.
I see a lot of people do that too.
All right. Do you feel like your products receive adequate visibility in Etsy search? Again, this is very competition based. 62% said no. That makes a lot of sense because Etsy's very competitive right now. 25% just, they don't know. They're unsure.
I think a lot of people just don't know how to check. That's what that says to me. I don't know how to tell if I'm getting good visibility.
Right. Yeah. This one, I feel like I would like to know a little bit more about this one, but the follow-up was how confident are you in your ability to optimize your Etsy listings, which is SEO and keyword research, tags, titles, yada, yada, for search. Keeping in mind that a majority of the people who took the survey are a part of my community, which means that they have a little bit more confidence than I feel that the average newbie would, because that's all we teach here.
Right.
57.3% are somewhat confident. And you know what? I consider myself in there as well. Nobody is 100% confident in their ability to rank in search because there is no way to guarantee that you're ranking in search.
Right. Even if you do everything right, there's no guarantee.
It is a science experiment.
Yes.
You have to test things and tweak them and make small adjustments here and there, and then let it sit for a while and then make adjustments as needed. Somewhat confident is how you should feel. That's how I feel, even as a manager at Etsy's largest SEO company. You only can feel somewhat confident because there are no guarantees.
Right.
But for those who are very confident, hopefully it's because you guys are in fantastic industries and you're doing really, really well. But 16.2% are not confident. For those who aren't confident, please check out Etsy SEOodles toolbox link down below. It's free. Have you used Etsy ads in the past year? Most people have. That's crazy. Yeah. I haven't.
I was actually kind of surprised by this.
Actually, no, I did use them. We used them over the holiday. That's right.
I guess not, because this doesn't really say how much did you use it. I think even as a new seller, experimenting with ads before you know what they're about, that's not really surprising. So I guess this makes sense.
A little here, a little there, If yes, how satisfied are you with the return on investment from Etsy ads? So do you feel like your Etsy ads actually worked?
Now, a little bit of disclaimer with this one. This includes a little bit of personal bias, right?
That's true.
What do you consider to be a fair return on investment from an Etsy ad? If I spend $20 on ads and I make $30, some people are going to be stoked on that. If that $10 profit, put me in the green. Some people are going to say, no, I wanted it to make me like hundreds of dollars. I wanted this to like make all of my money for me.
The issue is that there's no transparency or ability for sellers to really monitor ads performance. That is the biggest issue, is that sellers don't know if their ads are working because Etsy does not do enough to really let us know how effective our ads are compared to other platforms.
And again, this is a compounding problem, because if the algorithm isn't putting the correct products in front of the correct people, are the ads putting the correct products in front of the correct people? And is it giving us a fair return on investment if it's not?
Right. It's a different algorithm. Their ads algorithm is different, but SEO still has to.
Right. Which is why I've always said ads are either going to work for you or they're not going to work for you. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason in between.
Yeah. And you have to have good SEO. They have to know where to put and you have to have good photos, and you have to have a lot of other things in place. So again, this one kind of lacks a little context that would, help provide more insight. I'll get more clear next time I run a survey like this. Common complaints include spending money on ads without seeing significant sales boosts or getting lots of ad clicks that don't convert to purchases. Now, keep in mind that getting ad clicks that don't convert, that could be on your end. That could be your pricing. That could be you having crappy photos. That could be you not providing enough information. Once someone clicks on your ad, it is your job to convert that person into a buyer. Like, Etsy has done what they need to do. If you're getting clicks and no conversions from those clicks, that to me points to a seller issue, and you need to maybe analyze why those listings aren't converting.
Because if somebody's clicking on a product, they're at least mildly interested in what that product is. Obviously, we can't say that the amount of clicks that you're getting is fair or that they're even putting it in front of the right people. But if people are clicking on it and they're not buying the product, it doesn't necessarily mean that the ads themselves aren't working. Could be something wrong with what you're doing.
Exactly. And then optional, do you feel like Etsy's fully transparent about your ad expenditure and performance?
No.
I think this was an Anthony question. He gave all the toughies.
Yep. The answer to this one, I think, has always been no. Yeah, no, absolutely not. I don't think they are anywhere near transparent enough with the amount of ad spend that's going out.
Yeah. It's just too much. It's just too much vagueness. We just don't. The thing is, it doesn't allow us to be able to adjust when data is lacking, especially if it's data that Etsy could easily provide.
Now, again, the blue here is still significant. 12% of people said, I think Etsy's doing the right thing with my ad money.
Yeah, those are people making money.
And if we go back to how many people have you used ads, 65%. 10%, break that down. Well, I didn't get what I wanted out of it. But anyway, I have to go back further than that. But 12% is still pretty significant for the amount of people that we surveyed here. 3,000 people. That's, that's a lot of people saying that they think that the ads are doing something for them.
Yeah.
They're not entirely worthless here.
Many sellers find the ad platform's metrics and algorithms to be a black box, which is, it's just a place of mystery, making it hard to determine if their ad dollars are used effectively.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I think transparency, again, is the issue here. I don't necessarily think that only 12% of people are getting their money's worth at ads. I would argue
people don't know.
I would argue it's pretty much higher than that. I think you could probably take a good 10% out of the red and 10% out of the orange there. Not everybody is going to get their return on investment. If they did, then Etsy, that's just not how the world works.
Right. The fact that almost 30% of people have no idea if they're spending their money on something that's helping.
That's insane.
Yeah. All right, do you trust Etsy to operate in the best interest of sellers? This was a hot one.
Spicy. This was a bad one.
Only 188 people feel out of the 3,676 respondents, only 188 people said yes. 66.8% said no, and 28% said unsure. Those yeses are sad.
Yeah, this is pathetic. This is genuinely pathetic, and this should be alarming to Etsy. And before we even get to the slide, you guys know exactly who you think they're catering to.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the public sentiment, and it's obvious.
And now buyers are starting to, I'm seeing posts where buyers are like, aren't we supposed to not be shopping at Etsy anymore because Etsy's bad to their artists? Like, they don't understand that it's, yes, but that hurts the artist more to not shop there.
It is easier to fix this problem ahead of time than to do damage control when somebody famous ousts you for not supporting your sellers.
Yeah.
Because it's only going to take one famous person signing up to some billionaire or ultra rich multimillionaire Hollywood actor signing up an Etsy account because they're retired and they want to do something for fun, and their account gets shut down and you guys get sued into the dirt and put publicly embarrassed in front of the entire world. That damage control is going to be so much harder than just fixing public relations now.
Only 5% of sellers actually trust Etsy to act in their best interest. Most feel that Etsy's decisions are geared towards profit or favoring buyers over sellers, which they should favor buyers to an extent, just not when it comes to things like a buyer saying that an item didn't arrive when clearly the tracking shows that it did. This distrust stems from frustrations with rising fees, which, it's been a while since fees have gone up, poor support, valid, and a sense that Etsy has strayed from its original mission of supporting handmade businesses, which there will be more information on that here in just a minute. But
in your opinion, who do you feel Etsy operates in the best interests of? Anybody want to take a guess on this survey here?
This was an Anthony question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all know what the answer to that is.
This was the most shocking out
Look at that. 76% think they're shareholders. It's almost like it's blatantly obvious that they're more about making money for the people who are their shareholders and investors than the actual people that matter.
Now, what Pam and I discussed last Thursday was that this is all businesses. All businesses are going to prioritize their shareholders. But that's not what the public should feel or see. That should be something that's a given, but you don't feel it. The fact that sellers, 76.4% feel that, and that only 37 people feel that, sellers and shop owners are who Etsy operates in the best interest of.
That's enough to be a margin of error. That's like, okay, here's the thing. Shareholders are a necessary evil for a company of this scale. They are the ones that put a bunch of money into a platform so it can grow. The problem is when you start looking at initiatives for the customers and for the people that actually push the platform. When shareholders ask questions like, oh, gross merchandise sales were down because of this, this, and this, what are you going to do about it? The answer shouldn't be some candid response about how you're going to make the bank happy. It should be about how you're actually going to, you cannot be a coward when it comes to facing your shareholders and things. And we've watched the investor reports. We've watched people, I forget who it was. I think it was, I don't want, for fear of being sued, I can't say specifically. A bank. It was made a question that made me so mad that I had to stop watching because it was an irrelevant question that had absolutely no weight at all for the benefit of the sellers or the buyers of the platform, which are the sole people.
Oh, I remember what it was. It was, will getting rid of drop shippers start hurting our bottom line?
Right. Irrelevant, because drop shippers aren't allowed on the platform. And instead of saying, drop shippers shouldn't be on our platform to begin with, so you shouldn't be worried about a loss of profits from an already not allowed base. It's not illegal, but not allowed on our platform. Like, stand up to your shareholders. Stand up to them and tell them real initiatives, real things that you're doing, and say, we do not want drop shippers on our platform because they are damaging to the overall mission that we are attempting to accomplish.
And
if you lose some money from their shareholders, big whoopsie doozy, there's other people that are going to come in and invest in you for doing the right thing for your customers. That's the problem. The shareholders being who they're catering to isn't the problem. It's how they're catering to the shareholders that is the problem. They're afraid to stand up to their shareholders because they're afraid to lose money. Guess what? You've lost money 2 years in a row.
And now the shareholders are starting to get mad about it.
And guess what's going to happen when they're all mad and when all of your initiatives were to make them happy specifically and not to nurture and take care of the people that actually matter because you're afraid to lose some of those shareholders. You have to be willing to cut the loose ends to keep the boat afloat. That's just how it is, even if it goes down for a little while.
Money is a natural result of treating people well, whether it be your customers as a small business or whether it be the sellers and customers in terms of Etsy. Money is a natural result of doing that. And that is what would keep the shareholders happy. But instead, Etsy's catering only to the profit on their end, and it's causing issues for the sellers, crunching numbers and trying to make cuts here and there, and firing 250 Etsy support staff before the busy or right after the holidays.
That was silly. Absolutely silly. Anyway, before I get any spicier on this, obviously we are not economists. This is a significantly more complicated issue than what either of us can come up with. But we know that standing up to the shareholders whose best interests are not in Etsy as a platform, but in themselves as a whole is bad. They need to be able to stand up to the shareholders who do not understand that nurturing their own business will eventually provide them better futures than what their crappy little, I want to make money just this year. It's the long term that matters, not just the short term.
Exactly. An overwhelming majority see Etsy as putting corporate and buyer interests first, with sellers' well-being coming last. This sentiment outlines much of the dissatisfaction in other areas of our survey. In fact, I dare say a majority of it. A majority of the survey can stem back to this.
Yep, 100%.
All right, do you feel like Etsy treats you well or fairly? Most people don't know. About 50%, they're just like, I don't know.
Again, this is a transparency problem. It all goes back to transparency.
Yep. 30% said no, and 19.5% said yes. I think the fact that people are unsure, honestly, I'm happy that it's unsure and not just no.
Yeah. Because it tells me that people are thinking and they're not just believing what they're reading in the Etsy forums.
Right. They're just unsure. But it's still, I feel like Etsy needs to do more to make sellers feel more respected.
And I hate stuff like this because it's going to feel like an Etsy slam piece. I love Etsy.
I do too.
I absolutely love Etsy, but every relationship has its problems.
Exactly.
Right?
We've dedicated our whole lives to Etsy. That's all we do.
And if I didn't believe in it, we would have already left it behind a long time ago.
Exactly. We just want them to do better. Many sellers feel like Etsy's policies are one-sided, with frequent reports of sellers feeling penalized or unsupported during customer disputes and rule enforcement. This is where we're talking about those cases where a customer will say an item didn't arrive when the tracking clearly says that it does, or a customer, disputes a purchase or tries to say that something wasn't as described when it absolutely was, and Etsy just immediately awards the seller a refund.
And I think, again, this comes down to not having enough well-trained customer support people. Because, realistically, how many cases do you think each individual customer support? They don't have the time to sit and research. And I think that results in a lot of people just click, 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 click. They're just getting done with their day.
Solve it.
They get into work and they've got 4,500 customer support requests they've got to do in an 8-hour period. That most of them, they're just clicking that yes button as many times as they can. And I'm making assumptions here, but.
How well do you feel Etsy represents the message of their slogan, which is keeping commerce human? It's funny that Etsy started using this slogan again after our Keep Etsy Human campaign. That was kind of a slam on their slogan. They hadn't used that slogan in a long time. And then after our Keep Etsy Human campaign, now they are running commercials for Keep Commerce Human. And I wanted to see, because they're bringing that slogan back and resurrecting it, how well do the sellers feel that they're keeping that promise? That's what a slogan is. It's your brand promise.
Yikes.
Unfortunately, most clearly do not feel that Etsy is very human right now because people are being treated in a way that isn't very human. They're either getting copy and paste responses, unhelpful responses, or there's just an overall lack of empathy.
And they're taking kind of unpopular stances on things like AI.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to put my opinion in here on whether or not I think AI should be on the platform. I don't run Etsy. I don't know what's good or bad for the platform, but they took kind of an unpopular stance.
They did. Seller site increasing automation, lack of personal support, and the influx of mass-produced goods as contradictory to a human marketplace experience. Only 7% felt Etsy still strongly embodies their slogan. There are a lot of things that are making Etsy feel less human. from the products being offered for sale, which thankfully Etsy is cracking down on some of those items, but items that are taken down by accident, if you're accused of not being handmade when you really are, how do you actually reach a human to dispute that? Right. Sometimes it takes several months. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. Right.
They're not afraid to step on the toes in a crowd.
How well do you feel Etsy still represents their previous mission of being a handmade marketplace? So that, again, we all remember Etsy as being the place for handmade. It used to be a part of their slogan. I think they used to call themselves like the place for handmade. And this one's even worse. The average rating 1.92. That is crazy.
100%.
And this is coming from a majority of our respondents being handmade sellers. But this is just how you feel when you're shopping on Etsy. And again, POD sellers, I do believe that POD has a place.
I do too. I really wish in the beginning they would have split POD into its own thing.
I still think it needs to be.
They could have done Etsy OD or Etsy POD or something like that.
Etsy
specifically.
OD sounds awful.
Or or Etsy on demand. Just something to split it away. And between that and drop shipping and Etsy or eBay resellers and Amazon resellers and all of the other problems that we've got going on, I 100% agree with this.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're doing enough. I don't.
Yeah. Sellers are frustrated by Etsy being overrun with mass-produced generic items and resellers gaming the system, which we still see happening, though Etsy is getting a little bit better about it.
Yep.
Terms like drop shipping popped up hundreds of times in our respondent where you could fill out your own answers. Many feel cheap factory-made products, sometimes resold from sites like Alibaba or Shein, are flooding the marketplace, making it tough for authentic makers to compete. Over 210 respondents specifically called out drop shippers as a major problem, damaging Etsy's integrity. And we see customers. I see people who, on my friends list who have no connection with me as being an Etsy coach. I just see them organically posting about, being an Etsy shopper and talking about how, I thought that this was going to be something handmade and it ended up being some junk from China.
Like, like my cat tree back here?
Right. Where we thought that it was, we were buying.
Came from a friggin' warehouse in LA that was a Chinese reshipper.
Yep.
It's a big problem.
All right, this was another quote. Etsy used to be the home for quirky handmade items. Now it's flooded with mass-produced products. This quote from a respondent aligns with media observations that Etsy has struggled with an influx of mass-produced goods, diluting its brand. When the media gets hold of things like this, which they did, this was around 1 year ago, a little over a year ago, Etsy started getting slammed by, it was NBC that did that big piece. That's a problem because that changes the way that buyers perceive the platform, and then buyers don't shop on Etsy. And that hurts all of us. Yep. Longtime sellers feel that Etsy's human and handmade ethos has been compromised by the company's pursuit of scale. So true.
No arguments there.
We asked sellers open-endedly, what do you believe is the biggest issue facing Etsy sellers today? This is where all those, those quotes came from, was this question. And obviously we can't give you all of them, but we were able to get summaries. So the response is focused around a few of these dominant themes. First one, high fees and costs. Many sellers, especially those operating on thin margins, see Etsy's increasing fees, like their transaction fee increase that happened a few years ago, payment processing, mandatory offsite ads fees for sellers who make over $10,000 as the number one issue. They feel these costs cut dangerously into profits.
Yeah, I still today do not agree with mandatory offsite ads. I think it's criminal and it should not be allowed.
Yeah, the fees I'm fine with. I'm fine with all of the fees, but other than the mandatory offset, because if you made $10,000 a couple years ago, you're stuck with those offsite ads forever, even if last year you only made like $100.
I think if you're under it for 2 years, you can contact them and have it removed.
I've never heard that, though.
But again, that's entirely hearsay.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's actually true.
Oversaturation and competition. This one is obvious. Another big theme is the sheer number of sellers and products on Etsy. With 100 plus million listings on the site, competition is obviously fierce. Newer or small sellers struggle to get noticed. Some blame Etsy for not doing enough to curb duplicate or low quality listings. Others simply note that Etsy's growth has created a race to the bottom in pricing and visibility. I think that this is, everybody thinks it's the algorithm, but I think that it's competition. I think that's exactly what it is. Now, Etsy did get rid of several million sellers. I believe they went from...
It was 7 to 5.7, I believe.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in just a few minutes.
8. It might have gone as high as 8 at one point.
Yeah, they've lost several million sellers just from the last 2 quarterly reports in between that. So that hopefully is
couple million, not several.
Yeah, hopefully that's due to them, helping. Resellers and mass-produced goods, we all see it. The presence of non-handmade items and dropship products is a major concern. Sellers who play by the rules feel undercut by those selling cheaper factory-made items. This could obviously incorporate some POD sellers as well.
Yep.
They want Etsy to enforce policies better to protect handmade sellers.
I 100% believe people that just buy pre-made designs on Creative Fabrica fall into the exact same category as people who are reselling mass-produced goods.
Yeah, because you haven't had
category of people.
You haven't had any hand in it. If you've made major modifications to the designs and added your own spin on them, that's different. But if you just buy an asset and stick it on a POD t-shirt,
I think even if you're adding a name to it as a customization, I still disagree with it. I think it still falls into the same category. I think it's a cop-out.
It takes 2 seconds to do, and it took no skills to do it.
It's not that hard to be that artistic. And honestly, regardless of your opinion of AI, Etsy allows AI on the platform. You could at least be artistic enough to learn how to use AI and make your own designs. Like it's I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm not going to continue down that road. I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but
yeah,
I don't really care. It's lazy.
Lack of traffic and visibility. Tied to oversaturation, a decline in sales and traffic was frequently mentioned. Again, a lot of people said algorithm. I think that it's just the saturation issue. Some sellers have seen their Etsy shop views and sales drop year over year. Again, competition. People don't have money to spend on top of that. And believe the algorithm changes or increased competition are at fault. It's the algorithm, or it's not the algorithm. It's competition.
I think algorithm is just a catch term. When people don't know what to blame, they just shoot straight to the algorithm.
Well, yeah, because it's like the invisible force. You know, it's like,
and it could be for some of you. It probably is, but for a lot of you, it's probably not.
The algorithm is the astrology of the Etsy universe, where it's like, let me explain my crappy attitude by saying I'm a Scorpio. Like, no, you just have a crappy attitude.
Right.
Like,
because you have to understand. Like she said earlier, your photos play a role. The algorithm plays a role. Your search engine optimization with the algorithm plays a role. Your descriptions, your pricing,
shipping speeds,
the actual demand for your product. Is there an actual current market desire for what you are making? Is there an overabundance of what you're making? Is there a popular corporate version of the product that you're making? Like there are so many factors that go into whether or not you can sell something on a platform that just blaming the algorithm is kind of a cop-out. You should really research what you're selling.
Right. One frequent phrase was getting lost in search. Sellers feel invisible unless they pay for ads or constantly churn out new listings. Again, you've got to have good SEO for ads to work anyway. So, just adding new listings constantly isn't a solution either. Poor seller support. This was the big one. Etsy seller support and communication came up as a huge issue, from the frustrating star seller metrics, which, debatable on how Etsy even, some things are just so dumb. Like if you buy from an Etsy shop and that seller messages you and says, thanks for the order, you could get dinged for not responding. To the lack of live customer service. This was a top pain point for survey respondents. Sellers also complained about payment reserves and sudden account freezes, which can seriously jeopardize their businesses. This is really sucky for those of, the sellers who have to pay for studio space, or maybe they have, an employee who helps them to make products that they can't pay. Those are all huge, and it all stems back to support. Shipping costs and policies. A segment of sellers are concerned with shipping. For instance, Etsy's push for free shipping back in 2019, rising postage costs, which Etsy can't control rising postage costs, and how shipping delays or issues are handled in cases and reviews, which Etsy obviously can. take care of that. They would just need to have better customer support. This wasn't the top issue for most, but it appeared in comments about the challenges of meeting buyer expectations while covering costs.
Yep.
We are not Amazon. Etsy is not Amazon Prime, and Etsy needs to stop allowing customers to bully sellers and giving those bad customers what they want when they complain and say, oh, I didn't get it. I want a refund when they did.
Banning those people.
Right. When, there are obviously things that can happen, and sellers should offer fantastic support when issues arise. But, you also have to give those sellers the benefit of the doubt as well.
And doing their due diligence with things like that. Like, the expectation used to be if somebody's product didn't show up to their house, file a police report. Like, did somebody steal it off your package? Have they reached out to did they take it off your porch? Did you reach out to the post office to see if it was actually delivered? A lot of times, even here, we'll have packages say that they're delivered, and then they'll show up 2 days later because somebody scanned it for delivery, but then it ended up falling off of a shelf or something.
Or it ends up on a truck and doesn't,
Right. You can't just immediately say, oh yeah, it's immediately the seller's fault, which they've gotten better about that. It's not as bad as I think people push it out to be, but it's still an issue.
All right. So do you plan to continue selling on Etsy long term?
I like this. Yep.
Yep. This was one that I threw in because I wanted to know.
Look at that.
Yeah, you know what? None of these are deal breakers. All of the stuff that we've talked about, it's not enough to make especially when we look at the people who watch my channel. These are the dedicated sellers, the ones who are, who are trying to learn and do better. They're in it for the long run. There's, almost 40% who aren't sure if they're going to stick around. But not very many people said no. Obviously, if those sellers are saying no, my next follow-up question for them was, if you plan on leaving, are you going to just leave Etsy, or are you going to quit business in general, which is coming up here in just a second. But despite frustrations, most sellers are not abandoning Etsy overnight. Many still see Etsy as a valuable marketplace for their business, or at least a necessary one for now, which, maybe that means that people are, the for now is just, maybe they're thinking about starting a website once they get a little bit bigger. They're just waiting until they outgrow Etsy, or maybe they're building an email list, or they're trying to build up their social media, but eventually they'll feel that confidence to branch out, which is good. That's what you should do. You can outgrow Etsy. But, for the most part, sellers, they're not leaving Etsy in droves.
Nope. Which contradicts a lot of public information of people saying that Etsy is just a dying platform. That Etsy is absolutely not a dying platform. And if anything, they're getting rid of the crappy sellers, and you should be excited to start your store or continue pushing forward.
And then the optional was, if you were to stop selling on Etsy, would you move your business elsewhere or shut it down entirely? This is one that I wanted to know, because a lot of people say, this is it, I'm done, I've had it. And I'm like, okay, so are you going to sell somewhere else? Where are you going to sell? Or are you
done, or are you just done?
Right. Done, or done.
Done.
And most people said that they'd sell somewhere else. So that's good. I don't want
to see that.
I don't want to see people give up their passions. If Etsy's not for you, try something else, or just open some more places while you keep your Etsy shop open. Etsy's not that expensive as long as you don't have like a gazillion items. Like, diversify, try new things. You maybe your target market just isn't on Etsy. Maybe they're on Amazon Handmade, or maybe you would do better with your own website. That 14.3% that would stop selling, that makes me really sad. I hate to see people lose their drive and their spark.
We also have to remember there's a lot of people who are just selling on Etsy because they want to make a quick buck, or maybe they just sell a product they don't care about.
Right,
like,
they're not passionate about it.
We have to assume that there's a very good chance that a majority of the people that would just stop outright selling are just people that don't really care anyway.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be the case, but a lot of them likely are.
Right. Are you actively exploring other selling platforms as an alternative to Etsy? Looks like most people are. Most people are looking for other ideas, which is why we're covering other ideas. I know a lot of people got really mad at me for covering Redbubble because the margins for artists are so small. But
again, beginning of it, we said don't put all your eggs in one basket. Having everything on Etsy is stupid. You should, when you have the availability and the income to move from one platform to another or to expand to multiple platforms, that's the best case scenario for you. Because again, if say you've got a successful Etsy shop and you've got a successful whatever other shop, when Etsy does something stupid or the other platform does something stupid, like put you on a 1 week or 1 month payment reserve or put your account on suspension, you haven't lost 100% of your income.
Yeah, diversify a little bit when you're able to.
Yeah.
I know it's not realistic for everybody.
Sure.
Starting the Shopify has been quite expensive, more than I thought it would be. It's nothing that's like breaking the bank, but
Sure.
I was pretty surprised by how pricey it is.
Yeah, have options available. I know it's privileged to say like you should have your eggs in as many baskets as possible. Realistically, what you should be looking at is when am I to a point where I can get myself another basket?
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be just like pushing all of your money into as many baskets as possible. We're not saying that either, but for the sake of reliability of your income streams, you should try to diversify as much as you can.
Right.
Anyway.
All right, about 62% of sellers are already branching out beyond Etsy. And here's where they're going. We asked the sellers to provide some of the other marketplaces that they're selling on. We couldn't include them all because you guys, there were a lot of repeat answers. There were a lot that just
like one person said one website.
Right. But
these are the ones that are statistically significant.
Exactly. 22% have their own website. 24% sell at in-person markets or craft fairs. Shopify is popular with around 19% using it to build independent stores, which, that ties into your own website. But Shopify, I think, it's a little different. Other platforms include eBay at 12%, Facebook Marketplace at 9%. I've never understood why anybody would sell Handmade on Facebook Marketplace, but some of you guys do really well with it.
Similar to in-person craft fairs, people that sell things that might be sellable on local. Yeah.
Amazon Handmade at 6%. Go Imagine got 8%, and Redbubble got 7%. 37.6% are still relying on Etsy, only on Etsy. For these sellers, Etsy's success or failure feels like a make or break situation because all their eggs are in one basket. That's 37.6% haven't diversified, and if something happens, they're screwed. So again, when you feel like you can start, just at least start researching some other options to have open alongside your Etsy shop. That way, it's not going to hurt to have both. Even sellers who aren't branching out yet are curious about other platforms. So we asked, what other platforms might you be interested in selling on someday? Of those, Shopify was 37% and building a personal website at 34%. Those were the top interests. So taking, having your own business that you own, having your own website. TikTok Shop had 24% of people curious about diving into social commerce, which was cool. I don't know how that's going to play out if TikTok ends up getting banned, but I guess we'll see.
Guess we'll see.
Amazon Handmade, that was only 21%. There were quite a few people who had also mentioned fair, but it wasn't enough for me to factor in as a percentage. I will say that those who sell on fair, like, for example, Miranda from Mirkwood Scribe, she said that she's actually making more money selling her bookmarks through fair than she is on Etsy. So depending on the product, if you can offer wholesale, fair, it does seem to be doing well for a lot of sellers. Non-US sellers are looking at places like Folksy, which is exclusively for the UK. Again, not enough people responded, but I know people always ask about places, local for the UK, so might be something to look into. And only around 11% said that they were only interested in selling on Etsy. So I like the open-mindedness.
Yep. Not too shabby.
All right, key takeaways. This is the big part, and then I promise we'll let y'all go. All right, number 1, sellers are feeling increasingly disconnected from Etsy's priorities. Survey data shows that only 1% of sellers believe Etsy prioritizes their interests, with many voicing concerns that the platform now favors profits and growth over individual artisans. Again, of course, they're going to favor profits and growth. However, the artist shouldn't feel like that. This perception represents a noticeable shift from Etsy's earlier community-focused reputation. Etsy used to be wonderful. 12 years ago when I first started selling, or I guess 13 years ago when I first started selling, Etsy was all about the individual artists and showcasing them, and now we don't see that anymore. The frustration boiled over during the 2022 seller strike, if you guys remember that, where thousands of sellers protested, citing concerns that Etsy has become a downright hostile place for authentic small businesses. Second, sellers are expressing frustration over what they see as a disconnect between rising costs and the value that they receive in return. So these are those fees that we talked about. Fee increases, higher ad spend, and mandatory offsite ads for those who make over $10,000 are common pain points, especially when sellers feel these costs don't translate to better sales or service. Again, sales, I can understand it because you have to do the work there, but customer service should be a must. Many also feel burdened by Etsy's programs like the star seller requirements or shifting SEO practices without seeing a clear benefit. Again, SEO, I think that this just requires more education. Hopefully channels like mine help. Let me know in the comments. I try. This imbalance is reflected in the data. Over 27% of the sellers report running at a loss or reinvesting more than they earn, highlighting financial strain and slim profit margins. This is just our report. This is what our report says. Our opinions, there's no way for us to tell, but our opinions based on some of the other surveys is that while 27% of sellers are running at a loss, again, new sellers, you're going to expect new sellers to run at a bit of a loss. It takes time to get, it takes money to make money.
Yep.
3, sellers are noticing a disconnect between Etsy's rapid marketplace growth and its original branding focused on handmade, personal, and community-driven commerce. So that whole slogan, keeping commerce human. Many feel that Etsy's emphasis on growth through more sellers, listings, and even manufactured goods has shifted priorities away from its handmade mission. I don't even really think Etsy has a handmade mission anymore. This concern is evident in how sellers rated Etsy's efforts to keep commerce human. As Etsy continues to expand and accommodate larger manufacturers, some artisans feel the platform is moving away from its original ethos, creating tension between its community-focused image and corporate growth strategies. I do feel that POD is factored into this. You guys know my opinion.
100%.
You guys know my opinion on POD. I think that some sellers do it wrong. And I think that trying to figure out who's doing it wrong versus who is a real artist, genuinely selling something that they worked hard on.
It's an ethical debate.
It's an ethical debate, and it's hard for Etsy to determine who is putting time.
Right. And they can't put their eggs in any particular basket when it comes to that argument, because it's not really. I mean, it is up to them to decide, but you can't attack your community.
Yeah,
and I think they know that too.
4th, visibility is a major concern for Etsy sellers. Sellers often pointed to Etsy's search algorithm as a source of frustration, feeling that changes or inconsistencies in how their products are displayed hurt their visibility. I can agree with inconsistencies. There have been so many sellers who are dealing with just not appearing in search at all. Like they are not in search and they cannot figure out why. And Etsy's just gaslighting them. Like that is a problem. That's not a lack of education.
I haven't personally seen anything about that, but I don't pay attention as much.
That is an error on Etsy's end. Many also blame mass-produced competition crowding the marketplace. To combat this, some sellers turn to paid ads, but this often feeds into ongoing frustrations about cost versus value. So it's like, one frustration leads to another. For those struggling with visibility, the appeal of smaller niche platforms with less competition becomes increasingly tempting. So these are the people who said that they're thinking about going to Go Imagine or Folksy or, even Fair, for example. Despite the challenges, there's still a sense of cautious optimism and adaptability among sellers. I love the phrase cautious optimism because I think that sellers, they're cautious, they're nervous, they don't feel safe, stepping forward, but they want to believe the best in Etsy. And that's where I am. Many are committed to continuing on Etsy and feel somewhat confident in their SEO skills, which is awesome. While frustration exists, some sellers have noticed positive changes like improved analytics tools. That's awesome. Etsy's focus on listing quality. Again, I love their new listing quality, that tab that we got a couple months ago, which has even led to an increase in 4 to 5-star reviews for some shops. That was within our respondents. There's also a genuine hope that Etsy will recognize seller concerns. That's why we're doing this, guys. We want them to recognize these concerns. Many sellers still believe in Etsy's original concept and want to see it thrive, us included.
Yep, big time.
By participating in surveys like this one and engaging in community discussions, sellers are actively pushing for improvements rather than giving up on the platform. We don't want to give up on Etsy.
Never.
And we do things like this not to slam Etsy, but to help guide them. We want to help guide them into better decision making where, obviously they have to appeal to their shareholders, but there is a balance and you can do both. So these are our future projections, just, things that we think the platform direction that it's going to go, things that could help Etsy. Etsy, if you're listening, please pay attention. So most sellers are sticking with Etsy for now, but many are on the fence. They could easily drop off.
Yep.
Continued fee increases or policies perceived as anti-seller could push them away. Etsy is just one bad decision away from losing good sellers, and that's not okay. External data shows Etsy's active seller count has dropped from 7 million to 5.6 million over the past year. Again, we don't know if that's from people quitting. It's more likely Etsy getting rid of some of those bad sellers that all joined within that 2-year period.
Trimming the fat.
Exactly. And some of these sellers don't belong on Etsy, and they need to go because they're selling things they shouldn't be.
A lot of sellers, most of them.
For many sellers, it only takes one more fee hike or a bad experience with withheld funds to trigger their decision to scale down or leave the platform. We don't want to see that happen, especially if you guys are passionate about selling. On the flip side, Etsy could reverse this trend by implementing seller-friendly changes such as improving support. That's the big thing. Capping fees or addressing the reseller issue, which they have been, but they haven't talked about it enough. They're not talking about how many resellers they are removing from the platform. They need to be more vocal about these things. With Etsy's 20th anniversary approaching in 2025, sellers are hoping to see a renewed commitment to their success. Etsy has been doing ads that are focused around handmade sellers, showcasing Handmade. I just want to see them actually help handmade sellers more than just brag about how they have handmade sellers, Diversification of sales channels. Again, more sellers are branching out to their own website, social media, shops, and alternative marketplaces to reduce dependency on Etsy, which is important, something we've always recommended. For Etsy, this growing trend means more competition. So Etsy has competitors like Go Imagine now. Sellers want better policies, stronger support, and real benefits for the fees that they pay. On the flip side, sellers are realizing the importance of diversifying to avoid putting all their eggs in one basket. New competitors like Artisan Cooperative, that's another one. You can find it. It's Artisan Co-op. Their logo is a rooster. Are emerging, while platforms like Shopify and Amazon Handmade are growing appeal for Etsy sellers. Again, look at these little independent handmade shops like Artisan Co-op and Go Imagine. These are all different options. Or Folksy, if you're in the UK. If you want to diversify, check these other platforms out. Etsy's dominance in the handmade space isn't guaranteed. This is a position that they need to start protecting or they're going to lose it. It needs to maintain seller loyalty through policies that truly benefit sellers or risk watching top talent build success elsewhere. There are amazing sellers on Etsy who put tons of time into their shops. And the moment that those sellers feel disrespected enough that they're willing to leave, they're going to take their businesses and move them to sites like Go Imagine. If Etsy wants to maintain their position as that top handmade marketplace, I strongly feel that they need to make sure that they are actually, taking care of what makes Etsy Etsy, which is these amazing top talent. Because these are sellers who have big audiences outside of Etsy that drive traffic to Etsy. All right, and marketplace dynamics and buyer trends. Etsy's growth has slowed since the pandemic boom, which we talk about starting in 2019 when Etsy saw a ton of buyers and sellers on the platform, with active buyers dropping from 92 million to 89.6 million in 2024, which makes sense because people, they weren't pandemic spending anymore. We were all locked up at home browsing Etsy and buying little treats for ourselves. GMS, that's money that sellers made, also dipped partly due to economic factors like inflation and consumer cautiousness, which we all know. We've talked about it multiple times. As shoppers tighten their budgets, sellers offering non-essential or high-priced handmade items could see slower sales. And plus, we're entering spring and summer. This is when slower sales hits all e-commerce, not just Etsy. To address this, Etsy may push discounts or promotions, which you guys will probably start seeing those over the coming months. Etsy's going to encourage us to run sales and things, which could further impact seller profits. Just remember that these are all suggestions that Etsy makes to us. They're not something that you have to do. You're not going to get penalized for not participating in a sale, but we are going to start seeing those during these slow seasons. Cheap competitors like Temu and Shein are also drawing attention. However, if you watch our Friday Bean from 3 or 4 weeks ago, Mark and I do show that these sites are seeing just as big a dip right now as Etsy is, which means that it's because people don't have money, not because of something Etsy's directly done. While Etsy insists it won't compete on price per their 2024 Q4 quarterly report, which is something Josh Silverman specifically said, it's leaning into its identity as a marketplace for unique, high-quality goods. So it's not handmade anymore. They don't advertise as being handmade. They say unique, high-quality goods. Etsy claims this quality focus is improving buyer satisfaction through more 5-star reviews and fewer refunds, which that's based on their internal data. If that's true, cool. Looking ahead, Etsy may ramp up marketing in 2025 to emphasize artisanship, authenticity, and human connection. Whether this will feel genuine or just like surface level marketing will depend on Etsy's actions and commitment to supporting handmade sellers. Again, Etsy's been running these ads for a while, but it has felt kind of hollow. Policy enforcement changes. Etsy's under pressure to address the reseller problem. They haven't talked about it since the holidays. Etsy claims that its new creativity standards introduced in 2024 don't change what's allowed, but clarify existing rules. Still, sellers feel the marketplace is overrun with mass-produced items, and if Etsy doesn't address this, dissatisfaction could keep growing. This isn't just with sellers, this is with buyers as well. Looking forward, Etsy's unlikely to cut off semi-handmade goods, which we're talking about POD, or production partners entirely, since those are profitable. They're making Etsy money. It's likely that Etsy will continue to emphasize handmade publicly while keeping its policies broad enough to maintain revenue. So they don't want to tick off the POD people, but they're not really doing any outward advertising for them. All right, seller community and advocacy. This is where we come in. Seller advocacy is on the rise, not just from us, but from others as well. The April 2022 strike and the formation of groups like the Indie Sellers Guild. Hi, are you guys watching? And obviously our Handmade Alphas, Keep Etsy Human movement shows sellers are becoming more organized and vocal. We had thousands of you guys participate in Keep Etsy Human. Thank you. On the positive side, Etsy is rebuilding trust through outreach efforts like Q&A sessions with their staff and their new fireside chats on YouTube. They just did one of those. I did a reaction video to that 2 weeks ago. It was okay. The fireside chat, not my video. Seller surveys and Zoom calls. Tons of you guys contacted me to tell me that you've been meeting with Etsy in Zoom calls, and you're not allowed to tell me what y'all talked about, unfortunately, because it's confidentiality agreements and such, but I'm glad that you guys are getting to use your voices. Use them wisely. And improve community forums. If Etsy wants to maintain a healthy platform, rebuilding relationships with sellers will be critical, and I think that this year needs to be the year that that happens.
100%.
Conclusion, guys. This is it. In the next 1 to 2 years, Etsy will likely need to find a balance between meeting investor expectations and keeping sellers happy. It's a balance. Yes, you got to keep your investors happy. Right now, they're not happy, and sellers aren't happy. The survey shows that if Etsy continues to overlook seller concerns like fair fees, reliable support, and enforcement against resellers, it risks losing the unique handmade inventory and community that made it successful in the first place. If Etsy loses all of the good handmade sellers, they're only going to be left with the junk. And if Etsy genuinely addresses these issues, it could spark new growth where both sellers and Etsy thrive together. If sellers are doing well, Etsy does well. If the buyers are happy, Etsy will make money, the sellers will make money, the investors will make money, everyone will be happy. But if the platform continues leaning towards profit over community, it could gradually become just another generic e-commerce site with sellers and loyal buyers moving on to more supportive platforms. We're not there yet. Etsy's the biggest for handmade. Etsy is still one of the top websites in the world, and that's huge. But it could easily shift. MySpace was once the biggest website for a while.
It was the social media.
Yeah. So exactly. Guys, Thank you to everybody who participated in the survey. All 3,000, you're good. All 3,600 something of you. I know this has been a long video, but we appreciate you so much. Please consider leaving a comment down below for the YouTube algorithm because we worked so hard to make this survey possible. Share the survey in groups, share it with people. If you see concerns that we have already addressed in this survey, we had enough results for this to at least hold a bit of statistical significance. Granted, there are millions of sellers, but at the same time, 3,600 sellers who all participated in this independent survey, that is enough to at least give us a good average of how sellers are feeling. So we appreciate you guys. Give us some love in the comments so this video at least gets a little bit of visibility despite the length. And we'll be on this upcoming Friday at noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Pacific time to talk more about this. I think that this will be our episode of the Friday Bean this week, and we'll
maybe a wolf emoji in the comments if you actually made it all the way to the end of this 2-hour long video.
Yes. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.